Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we got this Toro Z Master commercial mower. Customer brought it in and said that it wouldn't start, and if it started, it would run rough. Well, I started it 12, 15 times, fired up every time, ran perfect, no bogging when the blades were engaged, no kind of issue could I find any of those times I started it. I called and let the customer know. He said, okay, he'd pick it up. It took him about a week and a half or 2 weeks to get in to pick it up, but guess what? Wouldn't start when he came. Imagine that, right? Ever since, it has not been able to start whatsoever. I crank and crank it, will not start. Thing has like 2,300 hours on it. He says it normally runs great, been regularly serviced. This is on this Toro Z Master commercial mower. I'm going to show you the full diagnostics and repair to get something like this taken care of. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button as we go along if you enjoy the content. First, I'll show you what this thing does. Watch it fire right up today. There you have it. Absolutely nothing. Kawasaki FX691V engine. Again, has over 2,000 hours on it, but these Kawasaki's are normally pretty well bulletproof. You're either missing fuel, you're not getting fuel to your carburetor, the carburetor is not properly processing that fuel and getting it into the cylinders, you're not getting spark, or you have a compression issue. Now with this being a twin cylinder, you got one cylinder on each side, likely not a compression issue because of that. Normally both cylinders will not lose compression, and we know we were getting compression when it did start. So we can rule that out just instantly here and figure we either have a spark issue or an issue with fuel. I'm going to test the fuel first, since that's the likely culprit. I'm just going to pull the line at the carburetor and see if we are getting fuel, and if we are, is the fuel good? Just going to turn it over now. The fuel flow doesn't seem real great there. It should be shooting out a little bit at a higher rate than that. But right now we're not going to worry about that, because if we look at the fuel itself, the fuel is great quality. There's nothing in the bottom of it. Smells good. Now the customer says that he always uses ethanol-free fuel. He is a good customer. I do believe that, since they've had a fair share of ethanol fuel issues in the past, but you never know what they've gotten, you know, or somebody else has put into it at some point. So we can test to make sure that the issue is a fuel related issue, or see if it's a spark related issue, in a couple ways. What we're going to do is we're just going to take the air cleaner out and we're going to spray some starting fluid in here and see if we can get it to start. If it does start on the starting fluid, then we know we're not getting fuel into the cylinders. That's why it's not firing up. Now, air restriction in your air filter could also cause an issue. Normally it won't cause non-combustion, but if it's completely clogged up, I have seen it happen. Intermittent issues are kind of strange to solve sometimes, and many times they'll point to an electrical issue, where you have an issue with the low oil shutdown, or you know, with intermittent spark, bad coil, something like that, bad kill wire ground out. We can check all those, but we're going to do things one at a time to figure out exactly where to go. We like to use gum out carbon choke cleaner. Just seems not to be as nauseous when we're burning it off and when we use it on things. This is going to tell us again whether we're getting fuel and whether we're getting spark. If it doesn't fire at all, you know that you're very, very likely not getting any spark. If it does fire up, you know that the auxiliary fuel worked, and you know you're getting spark because it fired up. Now that doesn't mean both cylinders are working though, because you do have two. So if you do this and it fires up, we still would want to test each cylinder independently if we had any loss of power or anything like that, kind of what he was showing it presenting with. You can do this very easily by unplugging a spark plug wire. one on each side. And if you hook up a different spark plug or the one that's in it, either way, now this is just going to tell you that the coil's good. Your spark plug could still be bad, but that's very rare. We see maybe 3 or 4 bad spark plugs, you know, a year, and we work on 3,000 or 4,000 pieces of equipment. If you just take a rag, kind of insulate yourself and hold this against the metal of the block, you got to get down to metal. It's kind of hard on this one, but then you're just going to look for that spark in between the two sides there. If you do have spark, obviously you know the coil's working. You can also, say you unplug this side, we can try to run it on this side. If we're already testing here and the carb cleaner works, we can test it on each cylinder independently and just make sure both sides are firing with the carbon choke cleaner. Let's try it first with carbon choke cleaner and see if it'll fire up. If it does, we'll do the independent side test on it. With this engine sitting sideways the way that it does, it's kind of hard to get to these plugs. Hard to get to a lot of the different things on it. Just going to spray this all the way into the intake, past everything into the small hole. Try not to spill your gas everywhere all over you. So it fired up, it ran fine until the carburetor cleaner burned off. And then it didn't run anymore. We know this fuel is good. We know that it will run on an auxiliary source. So this points us towards a carburetor issue in this instance. If you fired it up and it stayed running right after you gave it a little carbon choke cleaner, you possibly want to look at the choke, make sure it's actually closing all the way, because sometimes you do get an issue where the choke just won't close all the way in order to start it. I think first we're going to run it independently on each cylinder. Just make sure, since they were talking about low power issues, that we're not having another issue that we're going to have to quote to the customer besides the one we find down the road. We've got everything kind of set up here to do. I'm just going to plug this other plug in and put it kind of down against the block over here. You don't want it against the spark plug. If you got it against the other spark plug, that's not going to tell you anything, because it will make that plug spark and give you false readings. So we know that this cylinder is working since it fired up with that auxiliary source with this plug unplugged. And let's do the other side. Same way. It just gives you a comprehensive view of exactly what's going on with this engine before you're going to quote a customer, or if you're doing it on your own. You want to know how healthy this engine is before you start working on any of the rest of it. Got that one plugged in there. Now we know this cylinder is firing. So both cylinders are good on this. The only thing we're missing out of the equation is going to be fuel. Question is, why? Are we missing fuel because of the solenoid on the carburetor? Now the solenoid on the carburetor, what that does is that shuts off the fuel when you turn off the ignition to make sure you don't get a backfire. If that is not working, then you'll never get fuel. If you turn the key to on, you should hear it click. That is very, very, it's a very loud click we hear each time we turn it to on. I would bet you good money that that is working okay. So what that's telling us, if our solenoid is working okay, and we are getting good fuel to the carburetor, why isn't it starting? It's going to be a carburetor issue at this point. The flow that's coming from here, that worries me. If you've got low flow like that, that means that either your fuel filter's probably plugged up or beyond its useful life, which this one very well could be. We'll check that. Or there's a restriction with either the fuel line or at the elbow where it comes out of the tank. I'll also talk a little bit about that. And we'll see exactly what's going on before we proceed to fix the rest of it and possibly have another issue down the road. To make this a little easier to work on, I'm going to see if I can fire this thing up and keep it running. Maybe on a little bit of choke or however I need to do it, but I'm going to try to see if I can't get it up on the table over there. Make it much easier to work on. died about halfway onto the table. Let's give it a little bit more carbon choke cleaner. Get it the rest of the way up there. Since we're going to be focusing on the carburetor and it's so deep here, the first thing I'm going to do is get all this out of the way. Just use a 14 millimeter. You got a couple bolts here, one on either side as a carriage. Wire over here that wasn't even hooked up. I'm sure they were using it for some sort of ground. Carriage bolt on that side didn't want to come out very easily. Should be good to just pull straight up and out. We can see the carburetor a lot better here, and I'll split to the other side here in just a second where we'll have a perfect view of it. But for now, I'm going to talk about that choke, which we talked about a little bit earlier. If it's not choking all the way, how it will not work. Now, this top cable is the choke. When this choke gets pulled back, basically the arm down here comes up. So that arm should go all the way up to the very top when that cable's pulled. Pulling the choke now. See how that cable pulls that arm all the way to the top? Now if yours is only pulling, say, to here or somewhere in there, that's not far enough to start it. It needs to be all the way up to get that to start up properly. If you need it to pull further, there's just a bolt here that's a 5/16 or an 8 millimeter. You can loosen that up, and then you'll just pull this cable a little bit tighter back towards you. You also want to make sure that that arm's able to go all the way back down with the spring when it's not choked. So if you've done these tests and you've checked the spark and you've given it some auxiliary fuel and it's still not starting, it could be completely flooded from bad fuel. So you may want to switch your fuel out and clean each of the cylinders out from that fuel. If you've been trying to start it for a long period of time, you can take the spark plug out and just kind of blow everything out. Make sure the plugs aren't wet. If they're not wet, it's a good indication that they're probably not flooded. But if you tried all that and it still won't start, you can run a compression test on both sides, make sure that that is good, or a leak down test is even better. But if you don't have those tools available, there's an easy way to check to see if you're getting the spark shut down at all. There's two wires that go up underneath here. The green one is going to go to your solenoid. That's what's going to be providing 12 volts power to your solenoid. Now, if your solenoid's not clicking, you want to make sure you're getting actual power to it. If you're not, you could have a problem with the ignition switch or something like that. But if you are getting clicking, you darn well know it should be working. This black wire is for the kill. So if you want to test this without any of the electrical system of the mower hooked up, you can pull this kill wire. As long as that engine is spinning and this kill wire is unplugged, this black wire going to the bottom, you should be getting good spark. Sometimes spark will kind of trick you when you're looking at it. It'll show and kind of look okay, but it won't be good. You could have something else killing it, and it's still kind of halfway showing, just not as strong as it should. You can unplug that kill wire and kind of test with that. If it starts up fine with the kill wire disconnected, you know you probably have an issue with one of the safeties or something grounded out, some sort of wiring or electrical issue or safety issue on the mower side of things as opposed to the engine side of things. Before we get into the carburetor, let's talk a little bit more about fuel flow and fuel supply getting to the carburetor. Now we know it was getting fuel. It seemed like it was kind of weak coming out of the fuel pump, getting to the carburetor. Now that should just shoot like 2 or 3 feet out of the end of that line as you're turning over the engine. It should not just kind of slowly come out like it was. So check your lines, check your filter. If there's any cracking around the inside of the lines, you'll want to replace those. They could be actually collapsing on themselves and creating a restriction there. If that's not the case, if everything looks good, you always want to look like at your shutoffs where the end comes here. Many times little pieces will get trapped around there. Next thing you know, you'll have a restriction. Anywhere where there's something on the inside of the fuel line is where you get a restriction. Somewhere there at that shutoff, right at the inlet of the fuel pump, you get those. And also something like this, you've got a 90-degree at the tank that goes in a little bit of a bushing. Normally there's not a shutoff on it. It's up underneath the seat on this one. Kind of hard to get to, otherwise I'd show you exactly. But there's a 90-degree. It has a little tube that goes down into the tank. That's your pickup tube. Well, the pickup tube will pull stuff up through it and it'll get caught at this 90. Those pieces of grass and stuff like this cannot go around that 90. So it gets all built up there. Next thing you know, you have a restriction and it can't pump enough fuel to keep up. So if you've got low power, no fuel, very little flow, that could very well be the issue. To check that, on this one, you'd have to pull the seat up to get to it, and you just pull that pickup tube out. But you'd see if there's a restriction in there. You can blow backwards through it. Some people will just pull the fuel line off here and blow air back through. Temporary solution. It may work for a while, but eventually all that debris in the tank is going to clog that back up. Check that flow. Now, if you're clear all the way back to your tank and you're still not getting flow, you'll look at the fuel pump. The fuel pump could be bad. If you know there's compression on both sides, the fuel pump should be pumping good fuel. This one is ran off the compression of the crankcase itself instead of one of the valve covers and stuff. So almost never is a compression issue going to be the cause of your fuel pump on this model not working. Almost always going to be an issue with either the fuel pump or restriction somewhere. So in order to remove this carburetor, we can go ahead and take our solenoid wire off. Again, you should be getting 12 volts between this green wire and ground if the solenoid is getting power when the ignition is on. If you're not, you know you have an issue. We'll take off the attachment for the air filter. Just the clamp there. Should just come up and off after that. Get it out of the way. Try to rotate it enough at the base of the air filter to get it out of the way. I didn't put this clamp back on, but I'm just going to pull it back off like such. Now we've just got some 10mm bolts and a couple 10mm nuts. You want to make sure that that wire definitely goes back on there when we're putting this back together. There is going to be one breather tube directly behind at the top also. The only thing left holding our bracket on is going to be this one 10mm bolt down here. I'm not going to take it all the way apart. I'm just going to loosen it so I can pull that back. Now we can get the clip off the back of the carburetor here. I like to take the spring off first. Just pull it up and off of that tab. And then from the back side, you just pull the tab towards you. And then it comes straight out over to the right. The spring that's attached to the choke arm, it just comes straight up and off to remove it. Now we can just pull this bracket back towards us and out of the way to the right. Let's remove our front piece here, out of the way. And everything else is unhooked, so just pull our carburetor directly this way also. It does look like I'm going to be hitting here on the muffler as I'm doing this, so I'm going to have to remove this stud in order to get that all the way out. Depending on how your exhaust is set up, you may or may not have to do this. On these engines on different applications, that exhaust isn't going to be in your way. You can either grab a hold of the stud at the back and work it slowly. Otherwise, I see people double nut them all the time and just bring them out with a couple nuts on the front side. What we're going to do, if we're double nutting it, we're just going to lock this nut against that one. And now we're going to slowly pull it out. Carburetor is now free. Looks pretty good shape, don't it? First, just take those double nuts off real quick. Seemed like this one was kind of hard to pull the last little bit off, like it had a little corrosion on it, so. The carburetor obviously looks like it's seen a few better days, but don't see anything too majorly wrong with it from the outside. Everything looks pretty good. I'm going to take our bowl off and see what happens. I always tend to use pliers to take that off, or to get it started at least before we take the bowl off. Seems easier to me. I'm going to clean the whole outside off before we open it completely up. Now I don't have exactly a clean working area anymore though. Let's flip this guy upside down. Hope for at least the cleaning part of it. Open this up, see what we get. I do always like to mark it just with a good old scratch to make sure that we know exactly where it went back to, which way it goes. Just makes it easier for me as opposed to trying to look at it and figure it out. Not really seeing anything right off the top that's going to tell me that there's anything wrong with this. I mean, that's really about as clean as they come. The O-rings actually look really good also. Don't see any issues there. Let's take our needle out. I don't see anything blocking it at all. Everything up through there looks great. All of our jets look pretty clear. I am going to go ahead and take off the afterfire solenoid real quick. And take it off, and we're going to hook it up to the power and see if it actually works. It sure sounded like it's working, and normally if they sound like they're working, they're going to be working good. And everything down in there is real clear. Was not expecting that to be so clear. Let's test the solenoid while we're here. Just going to hook this up to the stud for a ground. Get this in here. Be careful not to have a bunch of gas or anything all around. If you do, could create a spark. Now I'm just going to turn this ignition on. On, off, on, off. It works perfectly. So, goes back to, if you don't know the origin of the fuel, switch it out. I mean, this stuff looks great. I don't see any issues with it whatsoever, but apparently it's not good enough fuel for this thing to run. Haven't seen one that's looked great like that in a long time. We also could have a little bit of a fuel restriction, which we'll address, but I'm going to get some, at least gaskets on the way. I think that needle's fine. I think everything else looks good. We'll also pull out the pilot jets on top, see how they look, and get this thing rebuilt. I'm going to throw all this stuff in the ultrasonic cleaner here today. Pull it out and kind of just rinse it all off so it's ready for when we are ready to put it back together here tomorrow. Not going to put the solenoid in the ultrasonic. It's functioning properly and pretty clean, but everything else will go. Again, I like to always mark these. I don't believe they're different, but if you put a scratch on each, you know where they went at least. If you're trying to reuse any of these gaskets, pull them off before you use carb cleaner on them. Many times they'll swell up real bad once the carb cleaner hits them. And get all that gasket material off as well as you can. Gonna drain this entire tank here. And I just really can't believe how good that looks, but somehow isn't flammable enough to run the mower. Kind of beyond me at this point because it smells good and everything else. We'll let this finish draining and then we'll finish cleaning this up as soon as we get those parts in. Got O-rings and gaskets and everything in. Finished cleaning this all up. You can see how all that's kind of swelled up, just being left like it is. If you look straight down through, you should be able to see through the pilot jets and top. You should be able to see a perfect circle straight through there. Now if you shine a light, it should be very clear. This right one almost looks a little bit clogged. The left one looks perfect. When I first looked through them here a few minutes ago, they seemed fine, so either way, we can poke through those with just a little piece of a wire brush or a small like torch tip cleaner if you've got one of those. Micro drill bits work well also. Just get that completely cleaned out. Now you can see that this is really deformed. It didn't seem that bad before, but if this piece here is not like it should be, then it won't pull fuel properly. And that could have been the case as far as why it wasn't pulling any fuel up into the cylinders. I really can't believe that that fuel wasn't flammable enough to fire the engine. That's kind of crazy. One of those that you really don't want to believe at all. You can shoot carb cleaner through all these holes, get everything cleaned out. There's a bunch of them. You'll see that they shoot down at the bottom. You can go through each one of these holes back and forth, but when you shoot this, you should see a good flow. Hopefully I didn't get any of that on the camera, but each one of these should be completely clear all the way through both ways. And then obviously up through your pilot jets. Got your other holes here that just shoot straight up through. Make sure those are completely clean. You can look with, if you shine some light on this side and look straight down through here, you should be able to see a perfect circle as far as light goes. Now there's some tiny jets on the other side. Just get all the rest of the outside cleaned off real quick while we're going. There's some tiny jets. If you open the throttle plate, you can shoot through these. See how that all comes out? There's one here, and then there's 3 or 4 of them right up through here. Clean through those real well. We put it through the ultrasonic, so they should be pretty well completely clear anyway. Also your inlet, that's where all your fuel comes into the carburetor at. So if it's clogged, it could be clogged here or anywhere else through that elbow or down through. And if it's not completely clear along here, then your engine will flood. That O-ring won't seal. Now, I am going to put these covers back through. I did not get O-rings for the top here. They seem in good shape. Those are the only ones that I actually had all this stuff on hand besides those top ones. I didn't think I did. I thought I was going to have to wait, but either way, just a little bit of grease there. Now I scratched a piece into one of them, this one here. Match that up. Again, I'm almost positive that this doesn't matter which way they go, but just to be sure. All right, back down in there like such. And we'll put our cover back on. Next thing I want to focus on, I'm going to take this O-ring here. The O-ring around these jets. These jets just come out if you push them through. Many times I won't mess with them if they're stuck in there. I'm just going to do one jet at a time. Make sure they go back in the right side anyway. But this O-ring around the outside, if it doesn't seal perfectly, yeah, and see how brittle that was? It just broke into a bunch of tiny little pieces as I went to take that off of there. If that doesn't seal perfectly, this mower will not run well. It'll pull air around that outside edge and cause it to run very poorly. So make sure that that O-ring is good. We're going to replace both of them, of course. It's one of the ones that people will miss a lot of times because these aren't as prone to fall out as some of the other makes and models with this kind of same design. Just a tiny, tiny little O-ring that goes around there. And then again, just a tiny, tiny bit of, we use Complex 710 high temperature grease. Something that's very expensive, but it lasts a long time. We just use that because we use it a lot for our nail guns and stuff like that. Really, any non-petroleum based grease will work great. They say if you use a petroleum base that it will eat away at the rubber. Not sure how long that takes, but just want to kind of center that up. I'm going to push it up in. That one's good. Pull the next one down. Kind of the same thing. The O-ring just fell all the way apart as I was doing that. Into a bunch of little pieces. Again, you want to make sure that that main area is completely clear as you're doing that. I don't know if there's something in there, or looks like maybe I put a tiny little scratch on the outside edge there as I was doing it. Make sure that's completely clear before you put all this back together. If it's not, again, it will not get a good fuel spray and it will run poorly. Just taking all those tiny pieces off of there. Get that all off. All right. Pretty good shape. So got a couple pieces of that rubber on me there. Again, just a little dab of that grease. Just makes it slide in there nice and easy without getting all caught up. Looks like there might be just a tiny piece of something still down in there. Blow that out. I'm going to do this one the same way with the Phillips up through here. And just kind of guide it with my flat head till it's centered. Almost there. Snap right up in. Now we've got our, this is the inlet. That's the basically where the fuel comes in. It's going to come straight through there. You want to make sure all that's real nice and clear. All right. Forgot we need our one in the bottom here and then our other piece up top. Do the same thing in those locations, just a tiny bit of grease. Now you want this to seal around to the outside there. Yes, the majority of this is just going to immediately be removed as soon as the fuel gets in there, but it'll help it at least go on there smoothly and not get bound up. Good shape. Fit nice and steady in there, nice and sturdy. Now you can do it one of two ways. You can put your needle and your float and everything back together first, or you can do it like this. Either way, it's not going to matter as long as everything's clean. A little piece of something right there. Looks like it's down in the groove a little bit. See if I can use my spray off to the side here and get it out. It came right out of there with a little bit of spray. Another one. Put our pin in. I want to make sure that that flat side, I thought there was a flat side, yeah it is, to the right here. Just go through, because if you try to push it through the other way, it won't go. And we've got our bowl gasket. Get it on there. I also like to just lube that one up a tiny bit too, just a thin layer. Helps it go down in there and stick real nice. Perfect. And then we look for our mark. Figure out which way this went. Lines up with the mark here. So that'll go right back on. Should slide in there pretty smoothly. It's just kind of a press fit up against those O-rings. Alright, right there somewhere. Now this one's lined up. Different screwdriver just to kind of snug them up the rest of the way. Now we've got our after fire solenoid. You do want to make sure that you've got a crush washer there. Should be an aluminum one. Some people say replace them every time. I normally don't have any issues. All up to personal preference there. If you want to, go for it. Now all we need to do is get a few gaskets in between the carburetor and the block on there. We'll see what this thing does. Get the rest of this gasket off of here. This is the surface you want it to be completely clear too. You don't want anything left on it. If there is, you'll have an air leak and it will not run right at all. Normally I'll replace both gaskets, the one on this side and the one on the back side, but if the back side one does not break free, if this insulator between here and the block is not loose, I will not mess with it. There's no reason to. It was sealed right to begin with, and as long as the seal hasn't been broken, it will be tight again. No reason to pull it off there. You got to be careful because there is a little ridge here, so you don't want to shave that ridge down at all. That's just to ensure that it fits tight up against there. So if you're using a razor blade, try not to get to there at all, but do get all that gasket off. Use a towel soaked in carb cleaner, kind of finish it off here. Just kind of turns abrasive and it will take some of that gasket material off as you scrub. You also want to make sure there's not dirt all around this. It's going to get in those down tubes. Looking good. Now we're going to put this carb up there, get it started. I guess I can go from the bottom and swing upwards. Get our stud in. Of course, we got to line the gasket up with the stud also. Swing it up. And hold it in place while you get that in there. A little bit of lube on that will help. Just a tiny bit on the thread. Don't want to get too much on there. See if we need to double nut it again or if it'll just go straight on in like I hope it will. So it just went straight on in just because of all of the varnish and buildup on this stud. It's all the way seated where it should be, so that's good. Makes it a little bit easier when that happens. Now this gasket is not bad. There's no issue with it really. Everything is looking pretty good shape. So I'm just going to double it up. I'm going to put another one on the front here and just throw that on there. There's many times where I like to double up gaskets. There's not really a reason not to. I'm going to guide that breather tube kind of in there as you're pushing everything together. There's that plastic piece that goes in. And then the rubber hose goes on also. A little bit stiff right there, doesn't want to go in. It's okay, I'll use some needle nose here shortly and get that all lined up. Let's get our bracket on. And just start our nuts. Just want to make sure my choke was okay. It's not hitting on that gasket or anything. The gasket looks kind of weird how it's sitting up a little bit on the top side there. Seems like the choke's doing fine. Plug our solenoid back in. Oh, look at that. Forgot my ground wire, huh? Very important you have that on there. So we're going to move this spring around, and then basically it's just going to come up on this side. Top of the spring is going to come up and it's going to hit right onto this little notch of the choke. And just like such. Now we just need to get our governor linkage back over and across. Just pull it through. Pushes straight in, and again we got to move that clip towards us to get it out of the way. And then we push it back towards the linkage to snap it in. There it goes. And now we're just going to pull that spring up and get it into that little notch where it was. Just basically right on top of this plastic piece here. So it just sits right there. Everything should be free if you move the governor arm. Pull it down if you're on fast throttle. Everything should move freely. Same thing with the choke. If you test the choke, choke up, our choke rod comes all the way up to here, and then when I push it in, it should return all the way down like it does. Now we didn't move any of these linkages at all, but if yours come off or if you remove those for any reason, you want to put those back in the place that they were, of course. Last bolt for the bracket. You guys thought I forgot, didn't you? No sirree. Take this fuel line off from here. I'm going to blow it out real quick. Looks good there. I'm also going to just snip the other end of just a hair. Just makes for as long as you got room anyway, it makes for a very good seal there again. Now, there could still be some in that fuel pump. I'm going to just turn the engine over here real quick. Get all that out of there. It's good. Snip the end just a little bit. Make sure that it's not separating at all here. If it is, of course, if it's separating from the inside or if it's cracked or dry rotted, you'll want to replace that line. You won't want to reuse that. Make sure the inside of our boot is all clean. Don't want any of that stuff getting down in the intake. Didn't want to go smooth as I thought. Go ahead and move this down and then put it on, so I don't have to struggle against it. You want that nice and tight, otherwise if it's not tight against that rubber, it'll start to pull debris, grass, whatever down through there. Got the fuel filter here. We think may be a part of the cause of us not getting a real good flow. Take this off and go ahead and replace it while we're right here. I am going to go ahead and pressurize the tank and see if there's any more that I can get as far as fuel out of that line. So I'm just going to take my air compressor and I'm going to put a rag around it, around the fill tube, and pressurize the tank. You don't want to pressurize it too much because you don't want to blow out the tank. I'm going to blow this tank out a little bit more on this side. I'm not really seeing anything down in the tank from the fill tube, but it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. Now, I'm not going to blow backwards through this because I don't want all that stuff on the inside of the tank. If there's something in here, we're going to know once we do this next test, and then we're going to take that pickup tube out of the tank and address it that way instead of trying to blow that back through the tank and making a huge mess. Again, I like to snip that. Get this nice new filter. Seemed like there was still quite a bit of fuel left in there even after draining it. Got our other one here. Now if I try to blow through this, there's quite a bit of a restriction. Oh, I was going the wrong way, huh? I mean, there's pretty big restriction trying to blow that way through also. Snip both ends of this line. I'm going to take this back off at the outlet, go into the carburetor. We're going to put some fuel in and see what kind of spray we get from there. I got plenty of fuel in there. Apparently I still had the solenoid or the ignition on after turning it over last time to clear it out. I'm not trying to start this, of course, but just going to turn it over and see how far our fuel shoots. A rag to kind of catch all that as it starts to come out, just so it doesn't get everywhere. I mean, it's shooting from there all the way over to here, so I mean at least a foot out of there, as opposed to before it was just kind of dribbling. I'd say that's plenty enough fuel. I don't think there's a restriction at all in the line. Otherwise, we'd pull that pickup tube and see if there was something there. Show you guys how to clean this air cleaner out real quick. What I do for that, and then we're gonna fire this thing up. So this air cleaner housing is just kind of filthy. There's a bunch of caked on grime, hard to get off. What I like to do is shove a clean rag down the intake. Then I like to use some simple green and just kind of spray all around in there. Let that soak for just a second. Grab another towel and just kind of hold it over the outside. And all that stuff out of there, whether it be all the way inside where you can't reach, or the rest of it is going to come onto that towel. The stuff around the outside, way down in there, that you can't reach to, you can either shove your towel way down in there, or you can use your blower nozzle to just blow that back towards you. Repeat if it's real bad, like this one is. See all that stuff coming out at the bottom? I mean, it's just a bunch in there. Take that out of the intake. And we can finish wiping that down. I mean, that's quite a bit of stuff that could have got pulled up through the air filter at some point had it not been cleaned out. Now we can put our air cleaner back in, knowing that it's nice and clean. The thing runs great, so that's definitely a plus. Now, what was really the issue here? Were we not getting good flow? Was the carburetor not putting that into the engine? Or was it just bad fuel? Now, I guess we'll never really know, right? Since we didn't just switch it out to begin with. You can burn many hours doing things when you think you know something instead of confirming that those things are the truth. Especially if a customer tells you he's done X, Y, Z. Go ahead and do those things or check those things to make sure that that is actually the case. In this instance, I should have drained that fuel at least first to see if that was the problem. Now, I've never seen fuel that's looked like that, that's looked and smelled that good, that has not been flammable enough to run an engine. I mean, to me, that's out of the realm of possibility. I think maybe that pickup gasket or something in there wasn't allowing fuel at all into the engine. It was a very strange issue nonetheless. Tell me what you guys think down below. Was it my mess up, or did we get it taken care of like we should have? Either way, hopefully this helps you get your Toro Commercial mower Z Master taken care of. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already, if you enjoyed our content.